Welcome to VALS webinar, Who Polices the Police? I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people's traditional custodians of the land that I am on today. I pay my respects to the elders past and present. I also acknowledge that we are all on Aboriginal land across Australia. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I am Nerita Waight, a proud Yorta woman and the CEO of the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service. VALS works every day with people who've experienced misconduct at the hands of Victoria Police. Our custody notification service checks on the welfare of every Aboriginal and Torres Islander person who's taken into police custody in Victoria. Our Wirraway specialist practice helps hold police and the government accountable through civil litigation and coronial processes. Their work is vital, but it's made a lot harder because Victoria doesn't have an effective oversight system for police. More than 95% of complaints about police misconduct end up with police investigating themselves. Unsurprisingly, those investigations usually find that police did nothing wrong, even in cases where a court later finds they did commit misconduct. We desperately need better oversight of police in Victoria. The government is currently reviewing the police complaint system, which is one important part of an oversight system. But we have a broader vision of a properly independent oversight system, which we've set out in our policy brief published early this year, and which I'm sure you've all read, and a more detailed policy paper that we're releasing in the coming weeks. While we continue to wait for real police accountability, the Victorian government continues to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at Victoria Police. The budget last week included $334 million for 502 new police and more than $200 million to buy tasers for police. But no new money to implement independent detention oversight, no money for community interventions, no money for prevention or diversion. Just all the same old, each and every budget. Our panel today will talk about police racism and misconduct and how we can build a system that truly holds police to account. And we're very fortunate to have a great panel to discuss these issues. We have Auntie Ronnie Gorrie, Leanne Carter, Dr. Michael Maguire, and Tamar Hopkins. Auntie Ronnie, thanks for being part of the webinar today. Can you let us know a little bit about yourself?
My name's Ronnie Gorrie. I'm Gunoi Kurnoi. My pronouns are she and her.
Thank you very much. Dr. Maguire, it's your turn to say hi.
Hi, good morning or good evening from Ireland. My name's Michael Maguire. Between 2012 and 2019, I was the police ombudsman for Northern Ireland, responsible for all complaints against the police service here.
Thank you, Dr. Maguire. I'm very jealous of you being in Ireland. I've always wanted to be there. Next up is Tamar Hopkins. Can you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Tamar Hopkins. I'm currently on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I'd just like to pay my respects to all Indigenous people on the panel and in the audience. I've worked for the Police Accountability Project at Flemington, Kensington for over 11 years, and I've been researching racial profiling as part of a PhD at UNSW.
Thank you, Tamar. And now our very own Leanne Carter. Let us know a little bit about yourself, Leanne.
Thank you, and I'd like to pay my respects. I'm standing on the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and any Aboriginal people and elders with us today. And I'd like to say that our land has never been, our sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm a Wurundjeri Noongar woman, and I work at the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service for almost 11 years next week. And I am currently the statewide community justice programs leader here at VALS.
Thank you, Leanne, and happy anniversary in advance. A content warning before we start. We will be discussing issues that will potentially include references to Aboriginal and Strait Islander people who have passed. There's also references to trauma, violence, abuse, racism, and coarse language. If any part of our discussion raises issues or concerns for you, we encourage Aboriginal and Strait Islander people to call Yarning Safe and Strong, which is a helpline run by the Victorian Aboriginal Health Service on 1800 959 563. And everyone else can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. At the start of this year, VALS published a policy brief titled Reforming Police Oversight in Victoria. We put together this policy brief because the Victorian Government is currently performing what they call a systemic review of police oversight. This review is in response to a Parliamentary Inquiry and Royal Commission that resulted from the Lawyer X scandal. The scandal related to the management of police informants, but spoke to too much broader problems with police accountability. Our policy brief was based on the experiences of our clients, which we hear each and every day, and best practice, or perhaps better practice is more appropriate, from around the world. The policy brief sets out what we believe is needed for proper police accountability in Victoria. We believe that a more broad and fulsome Royal Commission into Police Misconduct is needed as a starting point. We see the reasons why each and every day, multiple times a day. In fact, just 30 minutes before this webinar started, there was another incident which gave rise to the need for independent police oversight. Our communities are among the groups most likely to be victimised by police misconduct. Abuse of power has been rife and inadequately investigated for so many years, and it is vital that Victorians understand the full extent of this abuse. The Victorian Government, Victoria Police and the Police Association have limited the scope of the investigations and reforms processes stemming from the Lawyer X scandal. Some of the key recommendations from our policy brief include establishing an independent police complaints body, having a complaint system that is culturally appropriate for Aboriginal and Islander people, that is actually capable of identifying and addressing systemic racism, and implementing independent detention oversight through our OPCAT obligations. You can read the policy brief on our website, and we will pop a link in the chat. We have also been advocating for better healthcare in police custody in prisons. Proper police accountability will help ensure people in places of detention get the healthcare they desperately need. We are also advocating for the Victorian Government to fix Victoria's broken bail laws. Victoria's punitive bail laws mean that more people are remanded in police custody, which is a particular concern when there is no robust accountability mechanism in Victoria. You can sign our petition asking the Premier of Victoria to fix our broken bail laws at vals.org.au/bail-petition, and we'll again pop a link into the chat. And now it's time to hear from our amazing panel. Question number 1 goes to the lucky Tamar Hopkins. One of the problems in Victoria is that we actually don't have any transparency about how police use powers like stop and search. What do we know about racial profiling by Victoria Police, and how is our understanding limited by the lack of oversight?
Thank you, Nerita. Racial profiling is the disproportionate use of unjustified or oppressive police powers against Indigenous and other racialised people. In Victoria, we've seen it formalised and embedded in operations that are designed to target Indigenous and racialised people, such as Operation Wayward in the West and Operation Molto in the Flemington and North Melbourne flats in 2006. We've also seen racial profiling in the way that police target their attention in particular areas, such as running high intensity and particularly oppressive operations in racialised communities such as Footscray, Flemington, Fitzroy or Mildura. These practices can result in widespread distress and trauma across these communities. We've also seen racial profiling in Victoria through the everyday practice of targeting Aboriginal and African drivers for investigation through the use of random intercept powers, pretext stops, and the oppressive and dehumanising treatment that racialised people are subject to once they've been stopped. And I'm hoping to make further data on this available on this specific point later this year. But Indigenous and racialised communities are overwhelmed with examples of unfair, oppressive police practices. And yet, while their experiences clearly establish the existence of systemic racism in policing in this state, the government and police remain in denial. Yes, it's true that in 2015, Victoria Police introduced Australia's first anti-racial profiling policy. But the reality is that this policy is presentational only. Victoria Police have done nothing to monitor whether police are engaging in the practices that lead to racial profiling. In fact, if anything, their monitoring capacity has become worse. In 2008, Victoria Police used to record the racial appearance of 90% of the people that they issued field contacts to. In 2017, after the recording of racial appearance had become mandatory, racial appearance was only recorded on 55% of search without warrant records. This means that the ability of Victoria Police to monitor its own practices has considerably regressed. Furthermore, none of this information is readily made public. Having access to clear data about what Victoria Police do and to whom and for what reason is critical in understanding the extent of racial profiling in Victoria. The police in Victoria need to get beyond meaningless policies and start monitoring the effect of their practices on racialised communities. Critically, this data needs to be made public, like it is in many parts of the US, Canada, and in England and Wales.
Thank you, Tamar. Auntie Ronnie, can you tell us what leads to racist misconduct by police? Do police face consequences for racism, or is there a permissive culture around racist behaviour, in your view?
All right, so the short answer is systemic and institutionalised racism. But I'll go into depth in relation to that. So policing all over this country, and in particular Victoria, predominantly made up of white males who are all racist. Okay, so there are no consequences for racism within the police or the racially profiling of people within the communities by police. There are no consequences for their racist behaviours, and in particular the excessive force, and sometimes, and in our case as Aboriginal people, most times the deaths caused by police, because they are untouchable, and to date, no police officer has ever been made accountable.
Thank you. Michael, can you answer, when there's a history of discriminatory policing and a lack of community trust in police, what role can an effective police oversight system play?
Thank you. Well, I think it's critical. The nature of policing in Northern Ireland during the Troubles was a fiercely contested space. There were major concerns within the Catholic community about what was seen to be a oppressive police force in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. So at the time of the Good Friday Agreement and the need to change the nature of the criminal justice system to make it more acceptable across the community in Northern Ireland, police reform, and particularly changing the nature of police oversight and the creation of an independent police oversight body was seen as essential in improving community confidence in policing. That ran parallel with a desire to change the nature of policing and move towards a more community-based policing. But external to that, the need for an independent, properly resourced police oversight body with a strong legislative base was seen as an extremely important factor in developing community confidence in policing.
Thank you, Michael. Tamar, it's possible to make a complaint about police in Victoria, but it's very rare for that to lead to any real investigation, certainly in my organisation's experience. What are the problems of the current police complaint system in Victoria?
Okay, thanks for that question. There are numerous fundamental problems with Victoria's existing police complaint system, and I'm just going to touch very briefly on one of those problems, but it really goes to an issue that Auntie Ronnie has just described in her description of what's going on with who are the police in Victoria. There is a considerable gap between police expectations of what the police do and community expectations. So those of us who work with people who experience police misconduct and racism expect the police to behave in accordance with the law, that is, using minimal force in a non-arbitrary, non-discriminatory manner and in compliance with legal standards and human rights. But police, on the other hand, have their own set of working rules about how the police job is to be done. They view it as common sense to focus resources on stopping and searching those whose outward appearance stereotypes them as risky, dangerous or suspicious. And any sign of non-compliance or even questioning leads to negative assessments of the person's dangerousness or criminality. And the use of threats, duress and force to gain compliance is normalised in this culture. Aboriginal and other racialised people, in continuity from first contact times, are expected to cower towards police and be docile. This is not about policing crime. This is about asserting dominance and control over racialised and other targeted communities. So given this considerable gap between policing by the law and policing in practice as we see it in Victoria, how is it even possible for any system of police complaint investigation to leave decisions about whether police have breached the law or human rights in the hands of police? And yet, as the VALS briefing paper states, over 94% of complaints are investigated by the police themselves. As many of you will be aware, Brett Guerin, a recent head of Victoria Police's Ethical Standards Command, resigned in disgrace after being discovered posting racist and misogynist comments online. What you may not know is that this man was also in charge of the police response to the Flemington complaints in 2006, during which he saw his role as addressing the perception of racial profiling. Now, this example spells out very clearly what the police belief is their appropriate response to complaints about racial profiling is. They work to address the perception of racial profiling, not the problem of racial profiling. And in fact, addressing the perception of racial profiling is part of what led Guerin to be given a Victoria Police Medal, and was no doubt a part in landing him a job at the Ethical Standards Command in the first place. So, I mean, really, this whole question of how you see, how you deal with racism goes fundamentally to the heart of the very complaint system itself. In another example, an officer against whom numerous complaints about racism and excessive force, including a civil claim and race discrimination proceedings, was discovered to have been later promoted to the position of a complaint investigator at Ethical Standards Command. So for these and many other reasons, it's fundamental that police complaints be investigated independently of the police. And yet Victoria's police complaint system fails at this very first hurdle, and there are so many others, but I'll leave it at that point. Thanks.
So, Ma, I just wonder what you might say about certainly the line that is trotted out to us on frequent occasions where we're judging a police accountability system by just a few bad apples.
Yes, well, I mean, I'm giving you those examples of individual officers who've risen to the top of Ethical Standards Command, but the very fact that they've got in there in the first place, given despite their sort of histories, and in fact, because of those histories and their attitudes towards racism, and they've got into these positions of power, shows you how entrenched, as Auntie Gori said, that these whole kind of systems of understanding and thinking about racism is. So these are, racism is in fact normalised. It's part of the everyday practice to view Aboriginal and other racialised people as inherently suspect. That viewing an Aboriginal and another racialised person on the street, it sends off triggers in police officers' minds. And this was really articulated by Auntie in her book, as that person is suspicious and needs to be investigated. So, I mean, these are normalised practices. They're everyday practices that go on. And our complaint system currently, it's not even on the radar of our complaint system to deal with these very fundamental issues.
Mm. Auntie, I wonder if you could maybe just expand on what Tamar just said there around how just the very appearance of an Aboriginal person can send those triggers.
Yeah, it's not just Aboriginal people, it's anyone that's different to being a white male person, okay? So you could be transgender, you could have pink hair, you could be from the LGBTQI plus community, you a person of colour, black or brown. You're different to them, you will be stopped, you will be deprived of your basic human rights, and that's your freedom. You will be strip searched if you give them any attitude. You will be taken back to the station and they will charge you, they will find a charge. And if you're like a smart ass to them, and that's a smart ass is deemed to be someone who knows their rights, which we all do. The minute we come out of our mother's uterus as black people, we are given our rights. As when we are intercepted by police or stopped by police, we are told of our rights. So you will be, racially profiled by police. It's absolutely disgusting what they do, but it's continuing on today.
Thank you, Auntie Ronnie. Michael, you were responsible for the investigation of complaints against police in Northern Ireland, which I don't imagine was an easy job. How does the Police Ombudsman's Office in Northern Ireland differ from the Victorian approach?
Thank you. Well, I think there are significant differences between the structures of police oversight and operations of police oversight in Northern Ireland compared to what you have in Victoria. I was responsible for all public complaints against the police. So if you walk into a police station and make a complaint, they are obliged to pass it to the Office of the Police Ombudsman. You can make complaints directly to the Office of the Police Ombudsman by a variety of different mechanisms. And so we had a very good record, now extending back 20 years, of all complaints against the police across a whole range of different categories. I was responsible for both misconduct and criminal investigations into the police service. My staff had the powers of a police officer, so we could arrest police officers, we could search their property, their homes, their lockers, and we passed an independent report to the prosecution service, who made a decision as to whether to prosecute or not. If it didn't meet the criminal standard, I was responsible for a misconduct investigation into that police officer, which was then passed to the police for an investigation. Very importantly, the police were obliged by law to give all information to the Police Ombudsman's office that we requested. And indeed, I had to threaten to judicially review the Chief Constable at one point for his failure to pass information to my office. That never reached the courts because he left and the new Chief Constable decided it was a battle he didn't want to fight. We published information on trends of police complaints. There's publicly available information across Northern Ireland, the police districts, about the nature and type of complaints, whether they be criminal or misconduct. We were structurally independent of the police, and what that meant was we were a separate body responsible to the Department of Justice. We had our own budget, we had our own legislative base, and our substantiation rates, that is the number of complaints that we found in favour of the complainant, ranged between 22 to 28%. Overall. I mean, those are significantly different figures compared to what I've seen in relation to Victoria Police. Also, very importantly, we published reports into the nature of policing activity. That for me was a hugely significant feature of the work that we did, because it demonstrated independent oversight and scrutiny of police activity. So what did that mean in practice? Well, if, for example, there was an incident where there was a serious injury or tragically death after contact with a police officer, the Police Ombudsman's office took over the investigation. We did the crime scene analysis, whether it be in a police station or elsewhere. We did the crime scene analysis. We liaised with the family. We made it very clear that this was an independent investigation from the police themselves. The police had no part at all in the investigation that was undertaken. And as I said, there was an independent report which was then published, which then sent to the Public Prosecution Service. And in cases where I felt there was a public interest, I then published the findings of the work that we did. That is a significant difference over when you look at those characteristics from what you have in Victoria, which is a hybrid model, where the vast majority of complaints in Victoria are undertaken by the police. That for me, actually, I think gives a false assurance about police oversight, because if you walk into a police station, if you want to make a complaint against a police officer, you have a 98 or 96% chance that that's going to be handled by another police officer. That was not the case in Northern Ireland. So that hybrid model is very different. My understanding of the powers of IBAC is that they don't have the powers of a police constable, which I think is hugely important, both in demonstrating the importance of police oversight and independent police oversight, but also in the practice of undertaking investigations. You need to have the powers to do the job properly. IBAC is a corruption body, an anti-corruption body. By its necessity, it is covert in the work that it does, whereas the Police Ombudsman's Office is outwardly facing. It was there to address explicitly community concerns in relation to policing in Northern Ireland. So therefore, the outward facing nature of the work that we did, the engagement that we did with communities across Northern Ireland, and the fact that we published extensively the work that we did, for me, was hugely important in demonstrating this was a body which was independent of the police itself. So I think there are significant differences when you look at Northern Ireland compared to the nature of police oversight in Victoria.
I think most would agree. I'm just going back to what Tamar and Anigori were talking about in terms of police and their trigger around anybody that is not a white male. I just wonder, you talked about how outwardly facing your model was. I'm guessing that came with community engagement, and were there any kind of positive reports back to you, or any reports at all about how those community members who were not a white male experienced the model and what benefits they saw from it?
Well, I think the legislative base in Northern Ireland, our Section 75 legislation, required all public bodies to record the nature of engagement with the community in Northern Ireland, whether it be by race, religion, disability, gender, and so on. So there was very good information that we collected, which allowed us to determine who was using the office and the extent to which we had community support across Northern Ireland. And indeed, when you looked at those figures, obviously religion is more of a significant issue here than race was, and certainly when the office was established. We were keen to ensure that the office was used by both sections of the community, and that was clearly the case. We undertook quite a range of outreach activity, which paralleled what was happening within the police service itself. There were new political structures set up for accountability mechanisms independent of the Office of the Police Ombudsman. There was a local policing board, and also local policing partnerships, the objective of which was for communities to have a say in local community policing and what that meant in practice on the ground. And I think one of the important points, I think, for me was that the nature of changing police oversight was parallel to a strong desire to change the nature of the police service itself, to change culture, to change behaviour, to change attitudes through a systemic change process. And that was parallel to the creation of the Office of the Police Oversight, the Office of Police Ombudsman, and changing the oversight arrangements.
And we have an audience question for you, which is, what do you see as the barriers of establishing a truly independent police oversight body in Victoria based on the Northern Ireland model?
Sorry, is that for me or I thought Tamara?
I think it could be for both. I mean, in your answer just before, you talked about how the model had to challenge values and attitudes, and I would imagine you would think that you really kind of need police to embrace the idea of independent police oversight. And Tamar, you're welcome to answer the question, as is Auntie Ronnie, if she would like, or even Leanne, who's been suspiciously quiet.
Michael, I think you should.
Oh, sorry, I was waiting for you to speak. My apologies. Well, I think one of the lessons coming from Northern Ireland is that there was a political will for change. Policing was a contested space. There's no question about that. And as part of the Good Friday Agreement, the peace process, the reform of the criminal justice system was seen as critical to creation of a new Northern Ireland. And the creation of new criminal justice institutions, and particularly policing, was seen as an integral part of that change process. So there was a political desire at a national level to change policing and to change criminal justice. That was required, I think, in order to overcome what was significant resistance at the time, certainly from the police unions that didn't want to see change. And it required a change at the top of the police, because the Patton report, which was the vehicle for change, made, I think it was about 200 odd recommendations to change the nature of policing. That required a change in behaviours, a change in culture, a change in organisation, a change in staff, a move towards a police service that was more representative of the community. There was a 50-50 police recruitment to bring more Catholics into the police service. So there was a real energy and a real attempt to change the nature of policing. And that couldn't have happened had there not been the political will to make change.
And I think just continuing on a little bit from that is just looking at the kind of political position that we have in Victoria at the moment, that we have, a government where police funding is increasing over and over again. There are more powers being given to police regularly. That there is no scrutiny, there's no monitoring of policing and what they do with those powers. There's a lot of secrecy about what police are actually doing when they interact with the public. So we've got a government that is and that seems to show no interest in reforming those real police practices that are causing the problems that we see all the time. So yeah, I see this is an opportunity to make a change at the investigation level. But I think we really need to take that lesson from Michael's description, that it's that wholesale change that's really needed to get, make a real difference to people on the street.
Thank you both. So, Leanne, a question for you. The Custody Education Service, which you oversee, actively checks in the welfare of any Aboriginal person in police custody rather than actually waiting for a complaint. What do your staff uncover through our CNS? And how does the CNS actually support police accountability?
Okay, so there's a few things to this. So the client notification system came out of the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. It was one of the recommendations because out of the findings from there, it was seen that a lot of people that were going into prison weren't properly represented, but that also weren't receiving the proper care and the procedures weren't being followed. So part of the welfare checks that our CNS program undertake is around welfare and legal. So just to give you an idea, for those that may not know, our client notification, or as I refer to it, the CNS program, is a 24-hour program, 365 days. And it is, that particular program has a group of staff who, once somebody has been asked if they're Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, assuming that that question is asked correctly, they are placed on a attendance module at the police. So once the police put the information in the press centre, it sends 2 emails, one to Crime Records and one to VALS. So we get that notification anytime somebody is correctly identified as Aboriginal, and then we make a call to that station and request to speak to that person. And the purpose of that is obviously to undertake the initial welfare check. Now, if we speak to that person, we'll do the welfare check with them. If that person refuses for whatever reason, that doesn't stop us doing our welfare checks or making sure that the police are following the right procedures. And this is part of where the accountability comes in, because when we call to do a welfare check, we'll have a yarn with someone, we'll find out what their injuries are, and when those injuries occurred, if they occurred prior to being placed in the cell, when they were in the cell, or, during arrest and things like that. So it's, during arrest, prior to arrest, or after arrest, or if it's occurred in the cell, we get their medical history. We find out if they've got any substance issues. We check if they've got any mental health issues, or we ask if they've, if they're on any medication. We found that people have been sitting in the cell without an asthma pump or without Ventolin before. So we've made sure that, they've been provided the medication that they can be provided within the cell. And if they haven't, we check in on police and make sure that they get shells, which is, that's the custodial health assistance people who come out and they do the withdrawal plaques and the blister packs, and they do the medical checks of people that are in custody. So quite often we'll push police when we're aware that someone's maybe withdrawing or coming down or might need a withdrawal pack, or, they're feeling really quite unwell. We'll make sure that the police are aware of it and that they contact shells. There's been occasions where we've raised issues around people self-harming. Police have really undermined the fact that, someone's told us that, they're feeling really quite suicidal or feel like harming themselves. And, we've told police that before, and we've got the response, oh, well, they're just looking for attention. And, we've had situations where 20 minutes later, that person's been taken by ambulance to the hospital as a result of ramming their head into a wall, or, trying to hang themselves within the cell and things like that. And that's the reality of what we deal with day in, day out. So quite often, because, police aren't psychiatrists, they aren't disability support workers, they aren't medical staff, they underestimate the information that is either provided by our mob when they're in custody or provided by us. We've had officers say, oh, well, one time I had a conversation with a police officer saying that, this person had a cognitive impairment, that they shouldn't be doing an interview without the person being present. And the police officer's response is, oh, well, it's okay, I've got someone in my family that's got mental health. well, no, mental health is very different to having a cognitive impairment and a disability. So, you know, quite often, you know, what we do is we actually say, look, you need to cease that interview, you need to have an ITP coming in. We make sure they follow their policies and their procedures. We make sure that they're well informed. And in doing that, we also keep very detailed records of what's actually going on, because we know our mob quite often feel profiled. We don't trust the police. No matter what our interactions, we could be doing our shopping, and, you know, we've got that spidey sort of sense that, you know, we're under scrutiny and we're getting profiled, or we're getting pulled aside and just asked a innocent question that could, you know, lead to our arrest or something like that. And if it hasn't happened to us, it's certainly happened to several of our family members, you know, that we're aware of. And in saying that lack of trust and things like that, people aren't safe enough to raise the issues within the station. And that's why it's so crucial that when we're engaging with anyone, doing those welfare checks, finding out what their meds are and things like that, we make detailed notes, because if they're not safe making that complaint in the station, then we've got all of those, all of that information and those detailed records that we can use to support that person when they get out of the police, you know, out of the police cells. Now, we know it's not every police officer, but we do know the impact and the culture that exists within the police force itself. And we do know that there's a tendency that they're going to protect their own, you know, they're not going to say anything. And to give you an example of the volume of the checks and, you know, the contact calls that we make, we continue to do welfare checks regardless. Even if someone doesn't want to speak with us, we continue to do our welfare checks right up until the time that that person's walking out that front door, or they're actually being transported to a prison outside a police station. And then if we've got more concerns or there's been issues raised, we follow up with the prison afterwards to do further welfare checks on that person. So just last year we had 11,850. So it's 11,850 notifications that our CNS team received that people were taken into custody. And as a result of that, we did 65,902 from memory, contact calls and welfare calls. So that's 65,000, like it's an enormous amount. So we're calling every 3 hours, we're calling every 20 minutes, because we want to know that they've called the nurse in. We want to know that someone's been able to have a psych assessment done, that someone's suffering from mental health. We want to make sure that they take that seriously. And that's really important in their accountability, because when they don't do that, that's where we raise concerns. And when issues, you know, do arise, we jump on them straight away as well. So that's to give you an idea of, you know, to see accountability aspect, you know, of what takes place. And as we know, situations within police cells, and police cells will never be culturally safe, they can switch like that. They can change within, you know, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes. And, you know, I think history has shown with the lack of any accountability by every police officer, whoever's been involved in any serious incident or a death of any of our mob, no one's been held criminally responsible. And I think that goes a long way to justifying the fact that police shouldn't be investigating and overseeing police complaints. So I didn't say too much, but I did say a lot in that much.
Can I just add further to that, just from my experience from being a police officer for 10 years, a lot of custody notifications aren't being done, and a lot of people are like not being supported. So with all that VALS are doing, and all over the country, we have Aboriginal Legal Services doing, we're still having deaths in custody, and it's because police aren't obligated to do this. It's not legislated that they have to do this notification, custody notification, and they treat it as a joke. And just being, from my personal experience being around these dickheads, it's a joke and just extra work for them to advise an Aboriginal legal service as someone who's in their custody. And let's be honest, they don't give a shit about Black people or Aboriginal people who are in their custody. They just want to get their charges, and they don't care about them. They don't care about their welfare. And that's just from my experience.
Yeah. And, you know, previously...
yeah, good work, Leanne, anyway.
Yeah, in the past, Ronnie, what used to happen was, you know, VALS, for instance, had an MOU with VicPol. Right now, that's now within Victoria, and that's obviously not, you know, all the other states and things like that. It's very different, as we know. But within Victoria, it is now legislated within the Crimes Act that Victoria Police have to call us. They have to call the ACJP member. And as a double backup check, we work quite closely with the ACJP mob as well. So we always ask as part of our check, have you contacted the ACJP member if we know that, you know, there's one in that area? And, you know, you're right, because sometimes we get that response. What's an ACJP member? You know, we could ring 5-10 minutes after an interview starts sometimes, and either in it, you know, they're already after they've been put in the system, and then we call and it's like, oh, they're in the interview. Well, that was awfully quick. They must have walked them straight from the front in there, because we know at the end of the day, us calling up and doing these welfare checks create more paperwork. We've been told that police should be able to just get on with a job. We've been told to stop ringing. We've had the phone hung up on us. We've had really angry police officers at us. You know what I mean? We've been told that we're wasting their time. Why do we have to keep calling? You know, someone's asleep. Well, that's great. Someone's asleep. So, you know, fantastic. That means they're safe. And as we know, you are correct. There are certain police officers and there are certain custody staff who do not care, who do throw up several red flags that once we are aware of it, we will jump onto it. You know what I mean? And we still have people dying in custody. We do. Absolutely. It's not good enough.
Definitely. And I think it's just important to remember that those in police custody are not always under arrest. And quite frequently we have children who are in police custody due to safe custody warrants. So that is, they're absconded from placement and they're being held in custody until the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing come to collect them. And, you know, there are very other instances, you know, people with mental health problems, people with disabilities who can unfortunately come to their attention and be treated very inhumanely. And like Leanne said, this is something that we deal with each and every day. This is something that we see people dying from and in which we see the most horrific effects of. And whilst we're on police behaviour, I'm just wondering, Auntie Ronnie, there are so many ways in which people talk about holding police accountable, so complaints, civil litigation, criminal prosecution of police. What do you think is the most effective in actually changing police behaviour? And once Auntie Ronnie's had the chance to answer, if any other panelist wants to contribute, that would be wonderful.
To be completely honest, I have no idea. All I know is that no amount of cultural awareness training in the academy is going to make them better people or have a better understanding of our culture and the way we are. And as Aboriginal people, we usually 9 times out of 10, our families are the first responders when we have conflict within the community or within the family. But going back to the question, it's hard for me to be an optimist because police in this country have never been made accountable for any criminal offences that they've been done. And just from my memory, 2 police officers have been charged with criminal offences that was a result of deaths of 2 Aboriginal people from different states of this country, and they were found not guilty. So, and like we all preempted the verdict. You know, it's sad, but I just don't know. I don't have the answers. I think what's happening in Northern Ireland with Michael, I think Aboriginal people have our own ombudsman and an investigative team that do the work for our people. And there needs to be more accountability. Right now, police are untouchable. They're not afraid to harm people or to use excessive force, to racially profile, because they're untouchable.
I think one of the experiences of Northern Ireland is that, you know, people will behave badly if they think they can get away with it. And therefore the accountability mechanisms for holding officers to account are hugely important. And I think one of the the lessons from Northern Ireland, where you've had an ombudsman's office for 20 years now, is that in looking at the objections to setting up an independent body in Victoria that the police make, such as, you know, you will have investigators who don't know what they're doing, or they're not competent to do their job, or they're out to get the police. All of those issues drift away when you look at the experience of Northern Ireland. You can create an independent, well-resourced, professional oversight body, and it's simply not true to say that you can't. And as a starting point for accountability, I think you need to think about what that means in relation to the current review that's taking place of police oversight. You have the Euro Commission is going to be making recommendations about policing and how you might feed into that. And I think we are, perhaps there's a different window for change now, and maybe I'm being over optimistic, but I think you look at the nature of accountability and you think about the objections to it, they drift away. I mean, the experience of Northern Ireland tells you that you can't have an independent oversight body. It has simply been there for 20 years. It's working. It is the confidence of the community. Is it a confidence, surprisingly, of the majority of police officers who are subject to investigation? Because we did surveys of both those who contacted the office, we did surveys of police officers, we did surveys of the wider community. What was their awareness of the office? We had an 80% brand recognition in Northern Ireland. People were aware of the Police Ombudsman's Office. Why? Because we published our reports. We published the reports which catalogued police misconduct when it was there. And importantly, we also catalogued police activity when we said there was nothing to see. And that objectivity, that independence of policing, which for me important in developing community confidence in the policing structures. But as I said to before, that is only part of the jigsaw. You cannot, as an old farming friend of mine used to say, you cannot fatten a cow by weighing it. You know, you have to have change within the nature of police itself. You need to change behaviours. You need to change the way in which they perceive the communities in which they serve. You need to have a police service which is representative of the community with which it serves. All of those factors need to be brought into play in looking at the totality of arrangements for proper policing and proper police oversight. But anybody that says you cannot create an independent, professionally staffed, well-resourced, legislatively underpinned police oversight body, those who say that cannot happen are quite simply wrong, because the experience of Northern Ireland is there. It's been there for 20 years and it's been working.
And Michael, I think you hit on two key things there. One was the confidence and the other was the ownership.
Yeah.
Because, you know, as I said earlier, it's, you know, we don't have the confidence because of, you know, the history and the nature of the way that, you know, matters have been dealt with, which then creates this feeling that people don't even want to put a complaint in because they sort of get that perception that it's not worth it. Well, nothing's going to happen anyway, you know, and it's having that confidence, but it's also police taking ownership and responsibility for their actions and for those behaviours, you know, and for that need for change, because that opens up transparency. And without that transparency, there's never going to be any confidence within that system, ever.
Leanne, you kind of, in some ways, inferred this, but, you know, if you look at our client base, and even if you look at our communities, it's very clear that there is a firm view that police accountability is difficult in the context of, you know, our colonial system, which is rooted in racism and sexism. And so one of the questions that has been posed to the panel through the Q&As, you know, are we expecting too much from a system that might not meet our expectations? And should we actually look to community-led alternatives as part of that work?
I've seen that question before. I thought it was an interesting one, actually. I mean, you know, when we're talking about community-led, obviously we're talking about, you know, sovereignty and having ownership over that process. But I mean, I think to some extent that there's sort of two parts. One, you know, the community-led, but also the cultural change in the shift. Now, we know that police are capable of changing, but we know they're capable, you know, I would argue that they're capable of changing in a cultural way when it suits them. women couldn't join policing before, right? So the fact that women could then join policing was a massive cultural shift. And the police are consistently changing their process and their culture within there. But when you raise issues like police should be doing anti-racism, training, for example, they don't want to. They kick back. They really push back on some of the training that's suggested and things like that. I think that, if police can't resolve issues and are not resolving issues and there's no confidence within that process, and we should be certainly looking to some community-led resolution. It's a bit like, we've got the criminal justice system's broken. And we know that's not working. There's no point continuously putting people through it. And it's much the same as this. There's no point continuously putting someone through a process where the process isn't geared to actually have a resolution that's encompassing. And that's certainly what they do. And, having it community-led means that community is actually part of the conversation and part of the change and drives that particular change. Because I think without that community input and that, consultation, it's not going to change. So, I would personally, I would argue absolutely.
Yeah, can I just say to further what Leanne was saying, that police are able to change? Well, I don't think that's true. From my experience, and like sorry, Leanne, I'm not having a personal attack on you, but when you said, they're able to make change because they allowed women to join the police, they're a pack of misogynistic bastards. Women are female cops, and they wanted white women in the police. Let that be known, not black women. And they tell black women every day that we're not wanted. They have all these inclusion programs to employ Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within their racist institution. But whilst we're in there, we're told every day that we're not wanted, we're not spoken to, we're treated like shit. Now, if they can treat their own like that, how in the hell are they treating my people out in the community? I don't have faith in the police whatsoever.
I suppose my point, no, absolutely right. And I suppose my point is that if they want to make a change, they can make a change. You know what I mean?
The Lord knows there's not the money to, because the government's given them all this money that should be given to community organisations, not-for-profit organisations that are helping people. We need more money spent on mental health facilities. We need more money.
Absolutely.
That's right. We need more money for detox and rehabilitation centres for our people. Because let's face it, a lot of crimes that are being committed by our people are drug and alcohol related. And that's just another topic that I would like to speak on at another time. But I don't think any drug and alcohol offences should be criminal in the first place. But that's for another time.
And when
we're invited back.
And
you will be. You are. I'm quite happy to push the next webinar with you, Annie, running on that topic, because it's really important to our day-to-day work.
Absolutely. No, I was just going to say, just in relation to that, Ronnie, we've raised the issue and we'll continue to raise it again, that the latest coroner's report that came out, there's been a 75% increase of, suicides within Victoria. And it was found that, the homelessness, the drug and alcohol, the lack of services, all the things that we know are going to exist when someone's coming, when police are more likely to come into contact with our mob, that's where they're going to be within, that particular cohort as well. And the thing is that, it was found that 75% of those people who actually, unfortunately, did take their own lives, had contact with police within a 72-hour period prior to their deaths. And that's a remarkable amount. So it sort of makes you stop and think about what is the policing role here, what is going on here, and really what's sort of failing within the process of everything. Because if it's not working, then we do need to actually, look at what that means.
Yeah, I just want to say, I thank God. I'm not religious in any way, but I thank my black God for the work that Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service do for our people. Without you fellas, there'd be more deaths and custodies, and that that would be swept under the carpet.
Thank you, Annie. That means a lot. to our staff, to myself and Leanne, because we really do try with our limited resources to do the best that we can for community, because like you, I am incredibly critical of the system in which we exist. And going to that, there's an audience question which connects to, I think, our shared criticism of the system and the capacity to change, which is the model that Michael talks to in Northern Ireland actually still reports to their version of the Department of Justice. Given the history that our communities have had, as well as LGBTIQA and other diverse communities, with reviews of police behaviour, with, look at the way that they form policy, look at bail reform, rather than doing what it was alleged to do, which was target serious offenders. It targeted petty offenders, people who, like Veronica Nelson, who committed a very, very petty offence and instead ended up losing her life in Dame Phyllis. Does an IBAC or an independent police oversight body connected to the Department of Justice, is that actually sufficiently independent? And if not, which I suspect the answer, what would intersectional community police oversight look like, and is it possible? That's open to anybody on the panel to answer.
Well, I don't mind taking the question first. Looking at the experience of the North, it is a very good question. I think my experience has to be that the Office of the Police Ombudsman has demonstrated its independence from the Department of Justice. When I was in post, I wasn't afraid to criticise the minister, which is highly unusual for any public servant in that role, to criticise the minister for a lack of funding that the office was receiving, and which undermined some of its failure to investigate some of the complaints that we had coming towards us. So I think the model that we had in Northern Ireland was an ombudsman corporation sole, which rested in an individual. I think that has its strengths and weaknesses, and is obviously dependent on who fills that role. But in my own experience and the experience of other ombudsmen in the context of Northern Ireland, there hasn't been any failure to take on the Department of Justice, to take on the police, and to say what was needed to be done in order to demonstrate the independence of the office. Because if you lose trust in independence, if you lose if you lose confidence in the independence of the office, that undermines your entire raison d'etre. So I do think, certainly in my experience, that hasn't been an obstacle to demonstrating independence, but I understand the question, and I think it's a good point that you need to think about in the context of your own jurisdiction.
I can just quickly add something in there. I think it makes a really big difference who is put in the role of being police complaint commissioner or ombudsman. The individual does make a difference in this case. They can change the whole approach of the office. So, that's a political appointment, unfortunately, but it's critical.
Last question, because I'm just noting the time that I've monopolised from all of you. Should there be more transparency around police internal investigations into misconduct allegations and internal initiatives to change behaviour, building off learnings from other jurisdictions? Shalene has noted that under the consent decree, the City of Baltimore and the Baltimore Police Department will work with communities to implement comprehensive reforms that ensure that they establish a community oversight task force to recommend reforms to the current system of civilian oversight. They adopt a policing approach that is community orientated and based on problem solving principles. Officers voluntarily interactions are professional and courteous, and officers conduct all investigatory stops, searches and arrests in a manner that protects people's rights. They also provide equal protection of the law for all individuals, including providing impartial policing services, and officers are required to use appropriate de-escalation techniques and attempt to resolve incidences without force when possible, and use force in a manner that is proportional.
It sounds very aspirational. I don't know the detail there. Seems if they've managed to achieve any of those things, that would be a world first. Yeah, I think transparency is absolutely critical in terms of what the police are doing, but ultimately we don't want the police to be doing this work. It needs to be done independently. We need independent investigation. Just trying to improve the police investigating themselves is tinkering around the edge. We've done it for decades. We haven't got anywhere. We need an independent police investigation system. We need to get it right from the start.
Well, this has been something that you've worked on, as is Ronnie, Gori, Leanne's been here, like she said, for 11 years. We're coming up to another anniversary. How do people actually drive change? I mean, this has been decades of work for some of you, a lifetime for others. How can we kind of leave with some sense of hope that we can drive change?
I think there was a question raised in relation to Victorian treaty process, and if we can include that up within our treaty process, that would be an amazing outcome. But I just want to leave everyone with a thought. Just police, there's a saying in police that they're the best criminals because they get away with it. Have a good day, everyone. Sorry. Yeah, it's pretty bad, but that's what they say.
It's like a mic drop, Ronnie.
I know. I've got no filters, Leanne, darling. Yeah, hence I've written a book about it.
Yeah, I urge anybody to read it. It's fantastic.
So I've got, I guess, one comment, and that this reform, while it's going to take a massive movement to get the kinds of changes that we really, really need. And this is, mass movement stuff, looking at how change occurs in Northern Ireland. That was whole of society getting behind that kind of change that we saw there. And so really this is like, we are talking to the converted, I think, largely here in this panel, and that getting this message out to the wider community, knowledge of the way the system kind of entrenches harm into, particular communities, how it's broken, how it's not working. So, really building this movement is critical, I think, for getting anywhere in the spaces we need to go.
We need you, Michael, to come to Australia and help us.
I would love to.
Yeah. The weather's probably no different where you are anyway.
Well, certainly in Melbourne, I think I experienced 4 seasons in the one afternoon.
Yeah.
I mean, building on what Tamara said, I mean, it strikes me that and what I've seen in terms of the response to change from government within Victoria, while there are signs that change is possible, there are signs that they're perhaps open to changes in certain circumstances. I also see a lot of resistance. I see a lot of resistance from within the police, from within the police unions to change. And my experience is, don't let that stop you. Don't let anybody tell you that you cannot create an independent police oversight body. It can be done. It may not be. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It can happen. You can change the way in which things are done if you've got the right legislation, if you've got the right resources put in behind it. And our experience in Northern Ireland shows, after 20 years, that it is entirely possible to have an oversight body which is independent of the police and which has the confidence of the community that it serves. So keep going would be my positive note.
Thank you.
Well, it sounds like we have a plan. I'm going to go to Northern Ireland. Michael's going to come here. His problem will be tackled. Thank you to all of you for really important discussion. This is a topic that is really dear to our heart here at VALS, and to have such passionate panelists today was fantastic and a real win for the audience who have enjoyed it so much. So thank you to them as well for actively engaging in the discussion, for submitting your questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all, and we appreciate you coming and taking the time to listen. Wishing you all a lovely evening and all the best. Bye.